Joining us now to discuss the possible defense pact between the Philippines and France, we have with us geopolitical analyst Benjamin Blandin, who is here with us live in the studio. As you can see, Benjamin is a network coordinator at the Yokosuka Council for Asia-Pacific Studies. He's also a PhD candidate in geopolitics, focusing on the phenomena of asymmetric warfare in the South China Sea at the Paris Catholic University. Asymmetric warfare is a very interesting topic, which we will get to shortly. But first, Philippines-France Defense Pact. We're getting serious now, aren't we? She just read it. Under President Marcos, the France has increased its security engagements with the Philippines. Help us appreciate the value of this defense pact. What will it bring to the table?
For me, this visiting force agreement is really a proof of the growing ties between the two countries, a proof of trust also, and a sign that France wants, as part of its broader Indo-Pacific strategy, to engage more with Southeast Asian countries, more with South Pacific countries, and particularly with the Philippines.
But why? What is what's in it for France? What's the rationale behind it?
Well, there's always this thought that France, but also other countries, might be looking for specific advantages. But actually, France has been a long partner of Malaysia, Singapore, many other countries of the region. So here it's more about setting an official framework behind the cooperation that is already ongoing.
But as deep as getting a visiting forces agreement, do you think we're really going to go there? Because it's quite understandable getting that from Japan, getting that from Australia, being neighbors in the same region, but France is very far from us. Can you help us understand how we got to this point?
Yes. Well, as you mentioned, there's been the innocent passages, the port calls, and discussions that have taken place about having joint exercise, naval exercise. And you notice that France has recently nominated a permanent defense attaché. So it's also, again, a proof of French engagement and the fact that we are taking the relation with the Philippines seriously.
So is that, the usual lines that we hear to uphold international order, etc.?
I wouldn't say France has such a great ambition. We have a limited naval means anyway, but still France is quite a unique country within Europe because we have territories, populations, permanent military assets both in the Indian Ocean but also Pacific Ocean. NATO, we are the permanent council of NATO. We are a nuclear power, so there's plenty of things behind France, and we're not specifically looking. Well, it's my assumption at least that France is specifically looking to have some kind of return on investment. We are not going to insist on the Philippines acquiring the submarines, for example, if the country
decides. As opposed to which country?
But if the Philippines really decide to go that way, France will be a good partner in it. And if Philippines decide not to acquire them, the VFA will be probably signed anyway. So I wouldn't think there's second thoughts behind that discussions.
Okay. Let's talk about asymmetric warfare, which is your area of expertise. First, talk us through what you call the true nature of the threat in South China Sea, and what exactly asymmetric warfare is in relation to the South China Sea.
Well, at the beginning of my research, there were two assumptions. The first one is that there's a great deal of confusion about what is happening in the South China Sea. Some people will call what's happening area denial, some call it hybrid warfare, some call it gray zone tactics. My opinion is that it's neither specific of the three specifically, but all of them all at once. And so my research is more about listing the phenomena that are happening, mapping who is doing what, when, with what kind of intensity, diversity, regularity. And in the end, I was able to list about 200 phenomena so far. And it's a constantly updated list and divided in 12 categories. So some correspond to the most graphic things that we have seen recently, like the June 17th. But it's actually a small fraction of the whole of what is happening. Because and by the way, China is about 90% of that list of 200 phenomena. And what is very unique to the South China Sea is that China is, not just China, but mostly China, is using these phenomena not separately, but side by side, working together, helping each other, even sometimes allowing each other, like reclaiming Mischief Reef or Subi Reef or Fury Cross Reef, allowed for China to deploy much more often, much longer, its maritime militia or its Coast Guard.
Okay. So what can you give us a better idea? I mean, what's been happening the most out of the phenomena that you recorded? What has baffled you? And I mean, give us an idea of how
What
you're
are
able
maybe
to
the
track
prevailing
these
trends?
movements.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's not just the quantity. Of course, there's more and more incidents, that's for sure. But there's also more regularity, more diversity, more intensity in the means that China is pushing forward to advance its interest. We noticed a clear switch from, like, if you focus on the data from CSIS China Powers, they listed 73 major incidents between 2010 and 2020, and at that time 50% were with Vietnam, 25% with the Philippines, and actually all the way since 2019 it's reversed. Now it's Philippines that is much more on the line of these incidents, first of all, and second of all, China is not just applying pressure or using violence, but it's also manipulating national and international law, HADR, economy, with all sorts of sanctions, propaganda, communication. There's really plenty. In total, I could list so far 12 different categories of phenomena.
Before we go to the 12 categories, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned in 2019 it seemed to shift, right?
Sure.
So whereas before it was mostly between China and Vietnam, now it's mostly between China and the Philippines. 2019, that was smack dab in the middle of President Duterte's term, so no major political shift there. What happened? What did you see?
Well, it happened that there was two incidents, major incidents in the east of Vietnam, where China tried to deploy an oil rig at the one time and some exploration, oil and gas exploration ship at the second time. And I think that Vietnam really considered it was a life and death situation where if it didn't resist, it would have to submit. And then on both incidents, Vietnam deployed every single ship that they had, and they applied transparentizing, by the way, and they allowed for public demonstration, which is quite rare in Vietnam. And I think China was not ready for the whole for everything that unleashed against them. So they tried 2014, didn't work. They tried again 2019, and I think they understood it was not going the right way for them, and that maybe they had to switch. I'm very sorry about that, to a weaker target, or what they considered to be a weaker target.
And
In short, Vietnam stood up.
Yeah, they stood up.
Well,
Stood
it doesn't mean that
Against-
everything is rosy and fine for
That's
Vietnam
true.
now, but what is sure is that we moved from 50% to Vietnam to now 50% to the Philippines.
You also studied different means of deterrence.
Yes.
Talk us through some of them and which ones have worked and which ones have not.
Well, it's my conviction since I started my thesis that using lethal force is not going to work, either at the individual country, so Philippines against China, or the whole of ASEAN against China. There is such a disparity in the military means, in the military might, that I don't think it's going to lead anywhere. But still, it doesn't mean there's nothing that can be done. And first of all, I think the position of the Philippines now is much better now than it was 5 years ago. The Philippines acquired the BrahMos hypersonic missiles. It multiplied the alliance and partnership with other countries. It modernized. It started really modernize the Navy and Coast Guard. So all of this is positive, and none of those can work alone. It really needs to go as a family of deterrence. So my work, part of my work, is about maritime domain awareness. And I'm really pushing forward, and it's connected to transparentizing. It means for the Philippines to apply transparentizing not alone, but as a group with Malaysia and Vietnam, for example, and which is what we call joint maritime domain awareness. Because
Is that ever going to happen, though?
He doesn't ask for much, does he? I mean, come on, with Malaysia and Vietnam.
Yes. Well, no, there's hope. Actually, I published a paper in The Diplomat about the growing ties between the Philippines and Vietnam, and it's my opinion that the ties have grown so much that what exists now between the two countries can be really considered a de facto code of conduct.
Okay. Do you think the focus of China shifted to the Philippines because of our country's transparency initiative?
I wouldn't, no, I don't consider that there's a direct connection. It's really, they tried 2014, they tried 2019, it didn't work. And you have to remember that in the past there was already naval battles or ground battles between Vietnam and China. The naval battle worked, but the ground one didn't work back in 1979. So I think they knew what could eventually happen if things kept worsening.
What has Vietnam done right?
You mean in the last years? Okay, well, it's really interesting because the Philippines and Vietnam have had completely different strategies. Vietnam invested quite little in growing its navy or coast guard, but it spent billions in expanding, reclaiming, and improving the maritime features that they control in the Spratlys, whereas the Philippines invested quite little amount of money on improving or reclaiming islands, but they spend a lot in acquiring ships. So those are two very different strategies, but also complementary strategies in the prospect of an eventual joint initiative of the two countries.
But also, as you pointed out, Vietnam back in 2019 and 2014 stood up to China, right?
Sure.
They didn't let themselves get pushed back. To your point about joint transparency initiatives with Malaysia and Vietnam, one of the reasons it may also not be feasible or a reality is Vietnam has much deeper economic ties with China than the Philippines does, right? So, you know, I'm not just laughing at you for no reason, but just the idea of it sounds so far-fetched at this point in time that I have to question, is there any other strategy that's more within reach of the Philippines?
Well, all of those three countries are confronted, whether they want to recognize or not, they are confronted to China's asymmetric warfare, and I hope they are going to cooperate together, but if it was not to be the case, there are other things the Philippines can do. First of all, it can keep doing what I already mentioned they are doing. They can also keep building the resilience between the population, educate the population about all that concerns the maritime domain. And also, it's my opinion that the Philippines should stop shying away from exploiting its maritime boundaries the way it should, like any normal country should. Because if you look at what we call the blue economy or the maritime economy, there's many sectors that are stagnant at best. Some sectors are even decreasing, like the cable laying, oil and gas exploration and production, or fish catch. But, and some other sectors just don't exist. No cruise, no tourism, no wind farms, no blue hydrogen, no very little subsea archaeology or other sectors. And I believe it's really because there's so little what I call eyes at sea, government eyes, public eyes, private eyes, that China can do whatever it's doing.
Those eyes might be busy inland.
So I would really encourage the Philippines, quite humbly, but I would like to encourage the Philippines to just boost its maritime economy and start authorizing cruise, authorizing tourism, sport fishing, yachting, all sorts of maritime activities.
Building ships even. We had that industry way back.
We also have a maritime blue zones bill, I think, coming out. Maybe they're waiting for that framework. Or do you think a framework or a legislation is not necessary for us to, so to speak, do activities first and wait for the legislation to follow?
Well, I would say maritime legislation is always better to have than not to have. So, yeah, that's always good. But I think one of the weak points that was identified by the authorities was the regulation of civilian transport of goods and personnel, which is which can be improved.
In your study of asymmetric warfare, first of all, I'd like you to define that. Is it just a bigger country versus a country like ours, the Philippines? And what strategies usually succeed in asymmetric warfare? What do you need? What are your chess pieces? What are our chess pieces?
Yes. Well, there's the trick with asymmetric warfare is that when you want to deter or counter it, there's not a playbook. It really adapts to very specific situations. So there is not a specific set of action that I can advise that could match or work for any countries. What is very specific is that it's not one phenomena, it's a multitude of phenomena all at once happening at different places. So it's really hard.
Maybe one example?
Yes. Well, I mentioned the fact of developing the maritime economy or boosting those partnerships, the visiting forces agreement, the reciprocal access agreement, the fact of organizing those joint air patrol, naval patrols, really actually act in as many sectors and as many domains as possible, because China is doing just that.
Okay, so let's go back to what you were saying, 200 incidents that you've studied, which you have divided into 12 categories. Can you talk us quickly through these categories? Maybe the picture will become clearer.
Okay, so I'll try to do them all. So there's economy, infrastructure, capacity building, HADR, higher education and research, diplomacy, propaganda and communication, aggressive lethal means and aggressive non-lethal means. Yeah, so it's
Okay.
pretty good.
So we are
sorry,
hitting
just,
that.
just to define terms, HADR is humanitarian and disaster
Yes.
response. Yeah.
In your study of China, what have they responded to?
Sorry, can you come again?
What have they responded to in the way? Which fields? What are they afraid of? I mean, since we're talking about warfare here,
Yes.
what have you noticed that the China responds to?
I think generally China doesn't like being pointed out for doing bad things, even though it's doing bad things. But transparentizing, there was some kind of dispute between the spokesperson of the Coast Guard recently and a Filipino researcher who said transparentizing in itself is not a strategy. But I think the authorities never said transparentizing was the alpha and omega of everything they intended to do. Otherwise, they would not have invested in building up the Navy and Coast Guard or acquiring the BrahMos or those air radars from Japan.
Okay, let's
But-
take it from there,
but-
though. Like, is there a broader strategy that you're seeing? Because
Wait, sorry.
Yeah.
To follow up on that question, you were talking about a conversation with different defense and security analysts, and the other part of that conversation, which another defense analyst just published a paper or an article on.
Or it was more a
says-
comment on social medias.
Right, right. Says that China has long stopped responding to reputational damage. Right. This is Xi Jinping's China. It no longer reacts as much to,
Yes.
But
in the meantime,
reputational risks the way that they did maybe 20 years ago. And so that's why the Transparency Initiative does not have as much teeth now, is the argument. What do you think?
I would say the Filipino government is on a tightrope because on the one side it needs to defend the national interest, but on the other side it also needs to be strong enough to push forward as far and as strong as it can. And the Philippines is on the way to be stronger with the BrahMos, with the radars, the air radars, naval radars, and so on. But many people ask, why doesn't the government use the MDT? Why don't they, after the June 17th incident? But it's a little bit like the story of Peter and the wolf. If the Philippines cry for the wolf too early, it might cancel the Joker card, which the MDT can be. So if it goes too fast or too rapidly, yeah, it could be not usable anymore.
having said all of that, though, having said all of that, how do you see the next supply mission to the Sierra Madre playing out? Do you see it as more hotter, cooler?
Well, there have been different suggestions on how to go about it.
Well, I'm not in the secret of the gods. I've not been told how it's going to happen. But I think it's going to be cooler than the last time. Because probably the authorities on both sides are going to work out some kind of protocol for allowing or making those raw emissions possible.
Okay. Well, we'll see how that plays out indeed. We're going to have to leave the conversation there for now. Benjamin Blandin, he is a geopolitical analyst and PhD candidate focusing on the phenomena of asymmetric warfare in the South China Sea at Paris Catholic University. Thank you so much for your time today.
Goodbye.